Hey
Hi,
everybody, I'm Sean
everyone.
Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh.
This is Living the Line. We're gonna talk about not lying today, though. I hear.
Yeah, we're gonna go off topic, but I think it's on topic because a lot of what we talk about is restoration, or a lot of our interest is in restoration and reproduction of comic art and line art, but that extends to an interest in restoration and reproduction in general.
Yeah.
What are we gonna look at exactly, Sean?
Well, in Carson and I are both almost 40. Carson just having turned 40, and me being almost 42. What I mean by almost 40 is that I overshot it a little bit. I gotta yield it back in. And in those 40 years, we've actually had, quite a few fairly significant art restoration efforts. I mean, the cleaning of the Sistine Chapel is has pretty much the high of my life. Seeing those first few photos. This is before I knew that perhaps they made a few boo boos. Um, but are you familiar with the boo boos of the Sistine Chapel?
No,
I
I
mean,
never followed that too much. I mean, as much as I'm like an artist and like, supposedly pretty heavily educated with all the degrees, I've always been a fairly forward looking person, contemporary looking person. Like, I'm a realistic painter, so I look back at all that stuff and draw a lot of influence in it. But I always hated art history, so um, like I always hated those classes. I just want to
sure.
look at it. I don't want to read about it.
Well,
So any of that kind of stuff, I look at the images. I don't follow and read along too much.
so the Sistine Chapel was restored. It was like a decade's worth of work. I think the restoration was longer than the actual painting. It was funded by all these media organizations. Like this Japanese NHK put up the money so that they would have exclusive rights to a documentary about it. And it's an incredible restoration. They were able to do amazing things because the the way that he painted al fresco meant that essentially the painting would be locked in at the end of the work period. So, he's like madly going to paint while this plaster is drying. And he just went crazy for 4 hours. And at the end of the 4 hour period, it's essentially locked into the plaster. And
Yeah,
so
for people that don't know, the fresco is the pigment goes directly into the wet plaster,
right. And
and then it
out,
becomes part of the wall. And if you mess up, you got to chip it off and do it again. So that's
yep,
also stylistically why it's very kind of like outlined and segmented. Is like, this is the area I can accomplish today. That's what I'm doing.
right. And fresco just means fresh, so he had to paint it fresh. So fresco refers to the type of painting, but it also literally means fresh. So the thing is, this is a incredible triumph. It transformed the way that people view these things. It went from being these sort of like dingy, you know, compositionally interesting but like dingy things to like these vibrant, like living, shockingly pastel things. And there's people who were like so shocked by it that they were like horrified, like, how have you done this to this great treasure? And there were
Yeah,
probably things that they messed up. Like, it is possible that not all of it was supposed to be fresco. That he used, I forgot what the Italian word for it, but it basically like an additive technique where after the fact you make a few, I was going to say
Bologna
highlights.
fresco.
Right, there you go. So there's a pretty good argument that he actually did add some details in black to some of the pupils and some of the, like, basically areas that were supposed to pop from really far away, and that some of that got wiped away by the restoration. Um, anyway, but fairly minor in the scheme of like taking this thing and transforming it, and
And
compare
and
that to
my pronunciation of that term was probably completely wrong, by the way. But something along those lines is where you paint more on top of it instead of into it. Yeah.
right. Uh, but compare that to the other major restoration that happened during our lifetimes, which is the Last Supper, the infamous Da Vinci painting where he just painted oil right on this wall that was
Uh,
in a sweaty area, and basically it was destroyed by the 20 years after his death. I mean, it was such a mess. But this restoration that they did, 20 years ago or whatever, tore it down to the original paint. Somebody was just like, nope, we only want to see the original work. Well, the original work is so fragmented, you've got gaps of like several centimeters between the flakes. And so
Yeah.
it's turned it into something that can only be appreciated by like 50 yards away.
Yeah, it's very patchy looking.
Right. And I would argue that is the culminating event of having pushed restoration way too far, past to the point where the art doesn't have the same utility it had before. Somebody can't go and have the same experience that they could when it doesn't look like a complete painting anymore. And so, the pendulum has probably swung back a little bit since then, but that's a fairly...
We should look at the Last Supper too, by the way, so
Yeah.
people. I didn't have that one pulled up, but I wonder if we can get a detail of that. Anyways, keep.
Yeah. So that I would say that's fairly extreme. That's probably the pendulum has swung a little bit back since then, but that was sort of the outer edge of like, restoration means making the thing exactly like how the artist had it. Nothing unoriginal may be there, but the thing is like, it improves your aesthetic experience if you look at a painting and don't see a rip in the center of it. So like, a restorer working with modern techniques who can go through and put a little bit of watercolor in there to obfuscate the flaws.
So this is the state to which it has been restored.
Yeah, quote unquote restored.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, because the idea of restoration is supposedly to try and get it back to the artist's original intention, right?
Right.
Recreate the artist's experience. Now, the artist's original intention fell apart,
Right.
so you would have restored it to then try and get it to look what we think Da Vinci intended it to look like,
Right.
which would be what we're familiar with, something like this. Well, that's like way over the top, but something
Yeah.
like this, right? They went back and did this, and then it's like, well, you're making so much supposition about what Da Vinci did based on getting experts on recreating his style, I'm assuming, that
Yeah.
we can't know that it looked like this. So from a historical perspective, the most honest thing to do is put it back to the state that we found it in. Which,
that's the argument.
Yeah, which is like, it's a weird one, because this is very presumptuous.
Right.
This is a very presumptuous.
The one on the right is a culmination of several centuries worth of people working on it
to keep it preserved.
Exactly. And the different methodologies have come in and out of favor as time has gone on. And so, it's just a question, like, for me, this tells us more about the restorers. It's true, like the way they've puffed out the sleeve there and everything like that.
Yeah, this right here.
Right. It's valuable for us to know the information we've gotten from seeing it underneath on the left. The question is whether the art has the same utility once it's been stripped down like that. And there's a middle ground here. But anyway, so all that is the setup to this most recent art restoration event that was big enough that you and I both noticed it and were shocked.
we texted each other and like, what the hell did they do? And then upon further research, I've come to the conclusion that they made the right decision. I don't know, Sean, if you feel the same way.
I want to talk about this. Yeah. So on the left here is a Vermeer painting. What's the accepted name for this particular thing? Keeping in mind that Vermeer himself had no name for this that we know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not pulled up on the. I can look real quick.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. This is
okay.
A very famous Vermeer painting. One of the few legitimate, like for sure, actual Vermeers that are in existence. I mean, at one point there was like 7 or something. How many are there now that are like 100% across the board? Everybody agrees is an actual Vermeer.
As far as I know, it's like in the 20s. There's like 20 Vermeer paintings or something like that. Again, I'm not a big I'm not so interested in who actually painted it or
Yeah,
not. It's like, is it a good painting?
yeah,
I don't.
and this
It's
well,
nice
this
to have the attribution, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how many there are.
So Vermeer is an interesting case for the conversation we just had about bootlegging. Vermeer is an interesting case in that he was basically forgotten by the time he was dead. Uh, his fame has all been post his death, and because of that, and because of the his status, and because of the sort of small bit of work that he had, he was a target for a long period of time of people trying to, manufacture other
A
Vermeers.
new Vermeer. We found a new Vermeer. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of his actual, like, probably legit Vermeers were so modest, and a lot of, the people who were going to make these new Vermeers are basically just biting from the existing ones and essentially compiling something that could pass muster at
Well, and
whatever
it's
particular time.
interesting because there are very, it's like he kind of composed in the same spot in a lot of them.
Hmm.
They have a lot of the same elements. And if you watch the movie Tim's Vermeer, which I completely disagree with how they wind up making the painting, but they show that the depth of the composition is pretty much, they're supposing that he had this mechanism set up at one side of the room, and that the other side of the room is where he would set up this stuff, and that it's always about the same like camera distance from the setup. So there is that repetitious nature of Vermeer,
Yeah.
where there's like a window here, there's people over here, they're
It's a
kind of.
small it's a small world. I mean, I think that he lived in a small, slow paced place, and he documented the small world that he was in. Uh,
But
and
they're
you can see,
supposing that a lot of them were set up in the same location,
yeah,
and that there's evidence of that in his painting. So that, yeah, for the people ripping that off, it's like there are
easy.
these very tangible, repeatable
Exactly. Motifs
images.
and
Yeah.
physical locations. So on the left is the Vermeer as we know it, as we knew it.
We have known it our whole lives. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And on the right is the newly restored version of
And
it.
you can see color is significantly improved, and
Yeah.
this could just be a artifact of the photograph too, but that dingy look that you were talking
Yeah.
about, that's an accumulation of filth on top of the varnish and
Varnish.
on top of the oil paint. So
That's
one
right.
thing you would do is, you would, hopefully, if the painting's varnished, you can just strip the varnish off, which is the whole intention of varnish, and then you re-expose,
Right.
and you can see how beautiful his colors are. And that's what Vermeer is known for, is his jewel-like colors, which is why the Thames Vermeer thing is so bullshit, because he doesn't even understand glazing and how that can make a
Right.
painting literally glow. These obviously aren't just paint by numbers, which is what he does. But they have found through imaging that there was this whole painting of this Cupid in here,
You actually see a
and
faint halo of it on the left hand side.
yeah, like you can see it in the wall. And there's all kinds of imaging techniques and x-rays and stuff that they can do on paintings, because paintings happen in layers.
Right.
That's the thing that the Thames Vermeer got wrong, is he didn't paint in layers. He just has like mix a color and put it there like a color by number. And a Vermeer, and most really great oil painters, especially classical oil painters, paint in layers, and that's, you get colors and luminosity you can't get. And so, from a historical perspective, it's really interesting to look through the layers of the painting and re-expose the artist's process. And when they do that, they oftentimes find things that have been painted over. The artist changed their mind about the composition or whatever. So they found this and decided to very carefully go through and basically use like paint thinner to rub off very carefully the layers of paint over it that hit it, and re-expose this painting. And when I first saw it, I thought, they're fucking out of their minds. Like, what kind of restoration person makes the decision to do that? Because this is such a beautiful composition, and a lot of that has to do with the emptiness of it. And also, like, this is how we've always known it.
Right.
So it feels right. This feels cluttered and wrong, and I'm paying more attention to this and less attention to this. So that was my initial thought when I saw this. Is like, you ruin the composition, and maybe Vermeer painted this and decided, nah, it's too cluttered, and like
Right.
painted over it. So who are you to make that decision? I don't know what your reaction was initially.
That my initial reaction, viewing this on a phone, which we should come back to, was absolutely, he knew that he had made a horrible mistake, and that the cherubic penis uh, was way too like a new focus for the picture, and that it's not sufficiently uh, what de-emphasized through color. You know, you can see that he's de-emphasized it some by essentially
And the
recreate.
face too, the pupils are like really, they're
Yeah,
they're not they're not fuzzy enough. They're too
that's
sharp.
right.
They
And
distract a lot of attention.
my initial thought is that he did this and he just said, "What have I done? Dear God, what have I done?" And he went through with a paint roller and and covered it up himself. But then the technical argument looks fairly sound, right? The the technical argument is essentially that the zinc oxide or whatever that they used to cover it over was from a later decade, right?
Yeah, they could run, like carbon dating on it. You can
Yeah,
take a very, very teeny like scrape of the top layer of paint and carbon date the materials, and it's like 150, 200 years later, I think it
yeah,
looks like that someone came and painted over this. So it's a fairly, well, it's a pretty like impenetrable scientific argument that there's no way Vermeer, and this is standard stuff in the art world when you're looking at, you're talking about people like bootlegging Vermeer. Well, if the paint is carbon dated 200 years later, then that's obviously not a Vermeer. It's just someone
right.
who's gotten really good at mimicking Vermeer. So then when I read that, like my initial, like Twitter rage reaction was starting to text all these people like, how dare they? It's so ugly now. What are they thinking? And then I actually like read the full body of the article. Like I started texting about before I even read the article, and I started reading all the science, and I was like, yeah, okay. Like, man, that's a ballsy decision, but it is restoring it to the intent of the artist. And I was talking to my mentor too, Dr. Richard Sarros, who's a really great art historian, um, and a really great painter, a rare art historian who is a painter and an artist first, and a really amazing painter. And he was pointing out a lot of examples to me of it's actually more standard for Vermeer to have paintings in the background. It exposes the erotic nature of the letter that she's getting,
Hmm.
so that's intentional. And that this was a pretty common practice at the time, that people would go over and fix paintings. So
Right.
someone later on came in and said, I don't like the composition, and made which is, that's the ballsy decision here now in my mind, is whoever owned this painting at the time said, I don't like it, let me have someone fix it up.
Yeah.
It's too scandalous, and whoever did it's really skilled. Like,
Yeah. It's
it,
tremendous.
it looks great.
That window shadow, they've put it down to the proper location. They can see that the light was diffused, and because the light is diffuse in the way that it is, that the light must have been above, and so that she's not getting direct light on her. She's getting diffused light that's bouncing off of the whatever is blocking it from coming directly in the window.
Well, and just
Um,
all the coloration, the glazing on the coloration, the sfumato, the fuzzy
yeah,
edges, that all looks like Vermeer. The radiance of it looks like Vermeer. Um,
I'm
he
even
that's one of the things that is the argument for him using some photographic techniques, is he has kind of an absolute sense of value and color rather than a relative sense within his paintings, which they say, in the Thames Vermeer, they're arguing the human eye only sees color relative, it can't see absolute. And so there's photographic techniques that you would only get with the absolute.
BS.
But that's, yeah, that's bullshit.
Absolutely BS. He the what he's doing in the foreground there with those drapes is straight out of the training that he would have had. He's trained drawing stiff drapery in a studio with charcoal.
Yeah, and the human eye is more sensitive to
That's
all of
right.
these subtle shifts if it's trained. Cameras blow that information out
Totally
all
out.
the time. So people who are talking this guy, like David Hockney is one of these camera obscura guys. People use camera obscura, sure, but this Tim's Vermeer where he's got a mirror and he just like is going back and forth and color matching the color in the mirror and then painting it on flat. It's bullshit. You don't know anything about painting. But that subtlety of attention to light that only the human eye can see, and only
Right.
the human eye can really manage the relative color associations that another human eye would recognize as realistic, is so well done in here. So whoever painted on top of it was,
Yeah, it's a
really
master.
great. Yeah,
Totally a
also
master.
a master themselves. But looking, so Richard sent me, I don't know if these are the ones he sent me, but he sent me like, because I was saying like what we were saying is it ruins the composition. And he said, well, you're just used to that
That's
composition.
right.
So it's not necessarily that the penis or the face are compositionally overemphasized. It's that they're overemphasized for you because it's an aberration. And
Yes. They're shocking.
aberration draws attention. When I teach my students about compositional balance and creating a focal point, one of the biggest things I teach them is aberration carries weight because it draws attention and attention equals weight. So we can't see this as good composition because it's an aberration. But if you look at Vermeer's
Right.
other paintings, very often, well, here's an example, and I don't know if I'm pulling, I'm just searching the net for Vermeer. I'm used to thinking about Vermeer as this very empty
Right.
thing. But Richard started sending me, no, no, no. Most of Vermeer's paintings have other paintings, maps, all kinds of images within them. So it's
In,
much more common that he has these things that I
including the deep space relationship. And go to the previous one more
and
time.
the same damn painting.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's interesting, like seeing this one fresh and not knowing this image. It's a figural relationship. She has a relationship with this image that's in the picture. And when you go back to the original one, uh, that it is similar. And the painting on the right is a figural group.
Yeah,
Even though it's in a painting, the Cupid is telling us this is what she's reading. We have a figural group now because we have her, we have the Cupid, we have her reflection, and we have us because the Cupid is engaging us individually.
yeah.
So uh, it's just transformed it from something that's a private moment only into something that is a dialogue between a figurative group. So
And erotic in nature, which is why they exposed it. It's like, well, you're bringing back the original meaning of
right.
this painting. Yeah.
So I've come around to that one, frankly.
So you like I still visually like this better.
Yeah.
And honestly, like going back and looking at other Vermeers, um, I still like these emptier ones better. Uh, but I've never like explicitly paid attention to it. So again, the fact that I'm paying attention to
Yeah.
all of these things in the background is now I'm giving them undue attention.
Right.
But I really do visually prefer the sparseness. I'm glad they pumped the colors back up because
Yeah.
that's what he's such a master of is the radiant colors.
Well,
Um,
we should also
but
say that
they did the right thing. They absolutely
yeah,
did the right thing because some asshole came along 100, 200 years later and made a decision for the artist that the artist didn't intend. They probably, I'm assuming it wasn't even a compositional decision. They just thought, well, you can't have a little peepee in there. So
right. Yeah, it's just things coming in and out of favor.
yeah.
We should also say too that we are engaging with this on a screen right now. Uh, that is not the same thing as being in front of a painting at the scale that it's at, seeing all of the different, like you said, the luminosity and all the different things that can come through when you're actually looking at a radiant surface. It is sometimes, I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that our engagement with a composition is radically changed by seeing things reduced on a screen. Uh,
Well, and these are pretty small. I mean, Vermeer doesn't paint terribly large. The ones I've seen in person are, well,
right.
like, they're not very big.
But
Um,
it's still different from it, especially like the phone reaction. I felt like some of my first reaction was like a phone reaction. It was a
oh, it was wait, yeah.
yeah. I'm looking at
And
this like little postage stamp version of it.
The big thing is the luminosity,
Yeah.
which is why I hate that Tim's. I know I keep going back to it, but
That's the title of this video, by the way. Tim's Vermeer sucks.
fuck Tim's Vermeer. No, go. I mean, go watch the. I actually would encourage watching the documentary because it's a good evidence of how most people think about painting, and seeing it on the screen reinforces how most people think about painting and how they see painting and how they think paintings are accomplished, which are like put the right color in the right spot. And I teach my students that a lot. Like 80% of the trick is the right shape at the right size in the right place and then fill it with the right color.
Right.
That's photorealism. And most people are impressed by that. And it's difficult to accomplish, but it's about 85-75% of the information you could get into a painting. There's another 25-20% of what's called structural color, colors that you can't mix, color that is about how the light moves through and interacts with the painting. Does it go through it and hit a white background and bounce back out and cause it to glow from inside? Does it hit the surface and bounce right off the surface so it's dead and flattened towards you? Does it, like, if you look at this painting, I know because I have so much experience with paint that there are these areas here. These are painted with what's called veluturas, and that's where you have a glaze that's got light colors in it. So they're kind of see-through, foggy veils. That's velutura, is the veil. Those make light like bounce around inside of the painting. So it's like a candle. It's actually kind of translucent. This would have been like a lighter area that had a very see-through blue painted over it. So the light goes through the blue paint, hits the lighter surface underneath, and bounces back out and actually radiates from inside. This is layers of see-through darks that are put on top of it, each other, and that allows the light to actually go into the paint. It goes further back in and it gets trapped in the way the an actual shadow works, traps paint. Stuff like this up here or on her forehead is like a more solid mix, and so the light stops at and reflects off the surface. And that's like the magic of painting, especially oil painting. And when people don't understand that, yeah, you don't see those effects on a screen. You can't see those effects on a screen. And so there are, yes, compositional things that we can't notice as well to do with the luminosity and the actual materiality of the paint, which is what I think you're saying.
Yeah.
Some of what we take as compositional indiscretions, like this blue, would be way more uh, attracting in
Right.
person.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's like that would draw you like a magnet. Um, and the one other thing I wanted to say about this is, as I recently read a autobiography by one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, Eric Heborne. Absolutely fantastic artist who almost entirely made his living from forging the work of other people, and he discovered at a young age that he had a knack for making quote unquote old master drawings, and was able to synthesize his skills enough to produce new old masters. And he could work convincingly in at least a dozen different styles and sold professionally in at least under 3 dozen different names. And he was a dealer in genuine stuff, and he would put his stuff in with the genuine things that he was working.
Was he
Uh,
selling it as like this is a Vermeer, or he was making up a fake old master?
no, so he would. So first off, he never sold anything that he would attribute. He would allow other people to make attributions.
Oh, he would just paint it and put it in the stash and see what people said. Okay.
You got it. And consequently didn't profit from it quite as much as he would have, but didn't actually break any laws because he was just making something. Um,
Yeah.
and so he has a very interesting book. He actually died. He was struck on the head. And he was like 56 or something. I'm pretty sure he was killed, and it's likely that he was killed by somebody in organized crime. outfit.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
Incredible artist, absolutely incredible artist. And this is an incredible document. It's a memoir that he wrote. It's called Drawn to Trouble.
Does
And
he talk about, I'm curious, in the forgeries when you're trying to force a false attribution, are there processes he does to, like, my dad makes he varnishes guitars. He does like the finish on
mhm,
guitar bodies. And there are chemical processes he'll do to age things. Now, I don't know if that would hold up to carbon dating, but
right.
he'll do certain things to, like one time he wanted to sun fade the thing and get it to look like it had been out in the sun for years and years, but he wanted to speed up the process. So he was like, "Hi, I wonder if I could take my guitar to a tanning salon and if they'd let me put it in the UV bed." Um, and he went and asked. I was with him when he asked, and they were like, "Well, if you want to pay for it, yeah." I don't know if he ever did it, but I'm curious if there's things in that book that he describes that can help a forger overcome
Yes.
scientific chemical analysis.
Yeah. So he actually wrote a second thing that was essentially a recipe book. He wrote it in Italian, and it was later published in translation in English. He was he was from England, but he became fluent in Italian and lived in Italy most of his adult life. And he wrote a recipe book as well, but he covers a lot of that in here. Basically, the carbon dating thing, he would only work on historic materials. And so what he would do is he was friends with all these book dealers. And every time a book came through that was from the period that he wanted, he would take the end papers and razor blade them out. And he would just be constantly on the look as a artifact dealer. He was constantly on the look for things that were of genuine, uh, that had nothing on them but were of genuine lineage. Um,
Did he paint?
yes, he was a painter as well.
So was he
I
buying
think.
dated paint? Like, because you
Well,
can
so
carbon date the chemicals in the
you
paint. Like
can,
that was.
but carbon, though, the time period he was working in, carbon dating was like a last resort. They take paper samples, they take canvas samples. You look at the canvas supports.
Mm.
So since he was in the industry, he knew all of these people and the methods that they would use as a sort of first blush thing. So, if he used supports that were the right age and he used a canvas that was the right age, or he used paper that was the right age, and he knew how to make his own gall inks. So, one of the things that he did was like figuring out the recipes. So he was essentially like an art historian. He would go back and look at written recipes of the different artists, and so he made his own gall ink. Um, he made his own stuff that would hold up to infrared analysis. He would put in,
Mhm.
um, he would cut his own chops from collector's chops, uh, and cut like facsimile collector chops and put them on there. He had all different types of aging methods, including like baking things in ovens, burying them, all different types of stuff, and oftentimes was frustrated when people would resell them, and sometimes they would try to age them more, and he was like, "What are you doing? I've already made it perfect. I've got this thing in my, what have you done, you jackass?" Like,
Like I have
anyway,
dated it to like 1748, and you're trying to
exactly.
push it back to 1630 when this guy wouldn't have been painting.
Uh,
Wow.
so here's a Corot sketch that he reproduces, the original and his own side by side.
Wow.
And one of the things he it's a fascinating book. It's a quite amazing book. It's out of print, which I think is a real tragedy. But one of the things that's really fascinating about this book is his overall attitude towards all of this is almost entirely utilitarian. What is the utility that somebody is getting out of this object? Um, and by adding something or subtracting something from this object, am I adding or subtracting utility? And by making something in the style of someone else, am I adding or subtracting utility to to the world? He doesn't use the word utility, but like that's sort of my analysis of his basic thing. And so
But it's
his
the question you asked about the Da Vinci is like, you're depriving it of the utility of the aesthetic experience that was
Right.
intended, and you turn it into this old funky thing that like only
Right.
historians can go, oh yeah, this is the original chipped off version, where everyone else wants to see, well, what did the painting look like? That's what gives me that religious
Right.
thing I need. Yeah.
Exactly right. And for him,
Mhm.
making something that didn't exist before is a net positive. And it doesn't matter if somebody like associates it with Verrocchio or whatever. Um, like it's a new image that didn't exist before, and therefore he has made something. He's made a positive impact on the world. And there's a little digression in the book where he talks about a particular painting, which I think you've pulled up. Um, a file for, and he talks about art restorers and what idiots they are. He has a little rant about this beautiful painting, and he talks about how magnificent it is, and then within his lifetime, somebody realized, oh hey, there's some overpainting in here that's from a different time period. Let's do some imaging and figure out what it is. And here is the revealed.
Awkward. But the original artist didn't do this.
The original artist did that.
They didn't do the overpainting though.
No, the original artist did not overpaint it.
I mean, color wise, they have significantly improved
Yes,
by stripping that off, but I don't know
stripping
about
off the old varnish. But the image, his basic argument was this restoration has ruined this painting, and that in the form that he knew it before, without the tutor there. This is an image of two sisters engaging with each other in a tender moment, and the charm of the sisters' faces is essentially the focus of it. Even though they're looking at the music there, we have a kind of closed loop between them and the music.
yeah.
And then this, I mean,
Well, this goes back to a number of things we were talking about in the Slog's dad video. The first is Gestalt. So this is a Gestalt principle of grouping. They become a single visual unit because they're grouped. And one of the greatest ways to emphasize something is, well, I mean, she's grouped here too, but isolation is one way to create a focal point and contrast. And so she's isolated from the group and becomes, and that's aberration as attention right there.
Right.
She's the aberration and draws a lot more attention for it. And yeah, like I think there's in that Vermeer, that was our initial reaction too. And I still prefer this composition. I prefer the less information. Like I prefer not knowing what's in the letter. I prefer the quietness of it. I like that about Vermeer. This to me is still overly informative in a way.
Right.
It's telling a little bit too much to the viewer. So I don't know on that argument of utility. I think they did the right thing. I would say that this person made it a better painting. But I don't know from a restoration standpoint. I do think the obligation is to the original artist. If you expose the original artist, like I think this exposed the Vermeer as not as good of a painting as we thought it was. And like sucks to be the original artist, but we've just found out you weren't as good as we thought you were. I don't know about the utility argument. That's a weird thing where and this goes back to the Slogzad too, this idea of human beings and poiesis, that we are semantic machines that make semantic meaning. And what is the ethical obligation to the original semantic statement, or do we have an obligation to the collective semantic project? Collectively those paintings have more collective semantic utility if they're better images, but you're actually being destructive instead of constructive to the original statement. And where does the ethical kind of onus lie? And that's a super deep question. Another thing I come back to a lot on this channel when we get more philosophical is individual versus collective, and how to sort that out. I think that's one of the main problems of our society right now, is the answer to, uh, do we value the individual or the collective more, or how do you balance that? And that shows up in these arts. Like, is it the collective utility, or is it the original individual utility of the statement? What did they intend?
Yeah, I don't know. Stephen Sondheim has a book that he wrote about basically all of his lyrics, and he includes critiques of other lyricists who are as well known as he is, and he limits himself to only dead people. And
Hmm.
his argument is that the dead don't care what you say about them. Um, and it's possible that that might be Eric Heborne's argument as well. You know, I think he's definitely informed by his early years. You know, he got into forging. He started at a paint studio uh, where he was working as a restorer at a studio, and occasionally they would get special requests from dealers where a dealer would say, "Is it possible that you might be able to find a maypole in that painting?" And
Oh, like, just, can you paint one in there, please? Yeah, that's
yeah,
like the Vermeer thing. Like, I want this in there.
yeah, and they would restore the painting, and Eric Heborne's job would be to add the maypole, um, or add ribbons in the girl's hair, you know.
Mm.
And these are his estimate is that these are essentially like almost valueless paintings that he has made valuable with a slight alteration. Um,
And when he's
and
doing complete forgeries, he is just putting new valuable semantic. Like, that has more obvious
yeah,
utility to me.
I agree.
The question I'm asking about the collective utility versus the original statement is when you start making alterations. But
Yeah,
when you're just making a new Vermeer and you're just making a new beautiful painting in the world, that obviously has semantic utility.
I don't think we're going to solve it today, but I'm hoping that
No,
you can
I,
vote in the comments.
I, well, yeah, I'm interested to hear what people think. I am also interested in a time where postmodern philosophy, which is still the dominant kind of outlook in the world, would celebrate the death of the author.
Right.
And so the death of the original statement, and celebrate the infinite interpretability of a work. So putting it on to each individual to interpret it, and putting it onto, like, what we're calling it, the collective semantic utility now. We just made that up. If that makes it into an academic paper, if it hasn't been in an academic paper already, you have to, like, link this video so I get some H points on my academia edu scholar rating or whatever. But the collective semantic utility of multiple interpretations tends to be the valued thing in a postmodernist worldview. It's interesting that the restoration projects now are going against that, and they're going back to the old modernist and enlightenment view of the artistic as the heroic genius, and we should preserve their vision at all costs. And that's so antithetical to every value in the modern postmodern, or not the modern, but the postmodern art world. It's kind of funny that those two things are happening at the same time.
Yeah,
um
I think people very rarely take their philosophical positions and attempt to apply them cross, not cross dominance, cross disciplines. I think most of the time people are utterly unaware of the implications of the philosophy that they've adopted in one discipline, and struggle to reconcile that with any other discipline. You know, the
Well,
person
I'm
who,
wondering too if, like, within the art, like, these are people who are dealing with classic painting, so the majority of the people dealing in these decisions might be Enlightenment era humanists, classicists themselves, and might not be as bought into the postmodern
right?
thing. So I don't know. It's not a. These are obviously topics I'm extremely aware of, but they're not conversations I sit around and, like, figure out. But it's something I'm curious about now that we've talked about it. Uh,
Well, I hope that you guys are curious and interested as well, and let us know what you think. And Carson, we ever gonna get somebody to argue with me on camera that that supposed Da Vinci is actually a Da Vinci?
I really, I sent so my mentor that I mentioned, Dr. Richard Sarros, he's a Da Vinci scholar, and I tried to get him, but he wasn't talking about the one that you were talking about. I don't know why he kept going back to the Salvador Mundi.
Oh yeah, I think Salvador Mundi's legitimate.
And he kept telling me why the Salvador Mundi's a legit one. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, the fucking drawing that I sent you. He's like retired and don't want to deal with it. Um, I don't know if I should say it or not, but he he has submitted a paper that I hope gets accepted because he sat me down and walked me through. It was basically his PhD thesis, and he just sat on it his entire career, where he has identified what he believes is a Da Vinci that has not been attributed to Da Vinci
Don't
yet.
say anything more about that. But
No, it's a damn good argument though. So I
yeah,
hope that paper gets
well,
accepted, and I hope he comes on and talks about it or argues that. Yeah, I've been trying to get him, but he'll like no.
well,
Salvador
it
Mundi.
no, I am totally with him. Then we're on the same page. Yeah, Monday is an interesting one because people there's a backlash against it, but I have no doubt in my anything, my core of my being says that it was painted by Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, I don't know why he keeps cycling back to that because I sent him the drawing and then he's I don't know. So I'm trying. I really want to. He's one of the smartest, most interesting, well-read. I mean, I call him my art dad. I have a real dad who's a great dad, but in the art world, Richard has been he's a great man. I
well,
don't use that term lightly.
if you guys ever want to interested in a new monthly thing where we get a scholar on and I take a totally ignorant non-scholarly position and we argue, have cage match style debate where I bludgeon them with my rhetorical devices and they try to retort with facts and I take the facts and distort them and make them feel like they're on trial. I think that might be a fun thing for us
Yeah,
sometime.
Twitter art battle. Yeah, we just have to get him. At some point, I would really like to get Luciano on as well once we've developed enough videos about resolution and information perception and stuff, which is a whole kind of rabbit hole that we're gonna have to go down someday. Like,
Consider that a threat.
yeah, it's the channel's gonna get denser at certain times, but we'll stick to comics primarily.
Sounds good. All right. Take care, guys.
I hope you all
Punch,
have an Excedrin.
punch that subscribe button. Check out our Patreon if you're interested in supporting. If you're able, share the link, and we'll see you next week.